By 1942, one man in Hitler's empire was winning every battle and breaking every rule. Erwin Rommel's Africa Corps sliced through British lines like a blade through parchment, tanks rolling over Libya's sands toward the Nile. Soldiers followed him not out of fear, but faith. Even his enemies called him the Desert Fox. Across Europe, his victories filled the newsreels that fed Nazi pride. Yet inside the Reich, Rommel's success created a problem no propaganda could fix. Hitler had found a general he couldn't control. And in the regime built on obedience, that was the most dangerous victory of all. Far away in Berlin, offices enfolded by heavy drapes, admiration curdles into calculation. The regime's architecture demands vertical obedience. Rommel's command style is lateral, fast, and disobedient when time is life. Reports note that he bypasses the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, High Command, improvises logistics through captured depots, and treats no-retreat orders as suggestions when encirclement looms. Logistics tells the truth more bluntly than any memorandum. Fuel from Italy must cross a Mediterranean hunted by Royal Navy submarines and aircraft from Malta. Every drum delivered is a miracle that arrives late. By midsummer, the line of advance is a thread, pulled thin by distance and deficits. Yet Rommel's tempo continues, rapid thrusts, sudden fades, night marches to outflank set positions, until the spearhead meets the fortified lattice around a railway stop the British call El Alamein. The map tightens. The horizon, once a promise, becomes a wall. In staff conversations and field memoranda, two incompatible instincts collide. A commander trained to preserve combat power, and a leader for whom holding ground confers moral meaning. The desert carries every sound, the rumble of armor, the grit against canvas, the staccato of teleprinter keys, and hides nothing, not the brilliance of maneuver, nor the consequences of wishful thinking when numbers, fuel, and time refuse to be bullied. Night opens on 23 October 1942 with 1,000 guns answering the same clock. British 8th Army, reorganized under Bernard Montgomery, lays down an artillery program so measured that batteries fire by the second, not the minute. The reply is thinner. German and Italian guns answer with skill but not quantity, their ammunition scales already cut by a supply chain that has been losing a war within the war. Minefields, nicknamed Devil's Gardens, are crossed at cost. By morning, the desert is a torn canvas of wire, craters, and gutted hulls. In the Africa Corps command post, sand whispers under tent flaps while staff officers mark penetrations and counterthrusts. The operational calculus is cold. Without fuel, maneuver collapses into attrition, and attrition favors the side that can feed it. Signals traffic sketches the wider picture. Allied intelligence, aided by air reconnaissance and code breaking, is tightening a net. Axis convoys from Naples and Taranto bleed under repeated strikes. The 15, Panzer Division, and 21, Panzer Division still launch sharp local counterattacks, textbook armored drills that bite and disengage, but the reservoir they drink from is almost dry. Requests rise for a tactical withdrawal to shorten lines, preserve armor, and trade space for time. The answer from the political center rejects the grammar of operations in favor of a metaphysics of will. Orders insist on holding. Reality records a front perforated along multiple axes. By early November, the balance breaks. British infantry brigades step through blasted lanes. Armored brigades follow, rotating fresh units into the throat of resistance until the hinge turns. The retreat that follows is not a rout. Discipline remains, but it is a long recoil over ground won dearly. Medical trucks overfill. Workshops cannibalize 2 wrecks to birth 1 runner. Mechanics smear oil on journals and pray for bearings to last another hour. The legend of invincibility stitched in earlier campaigns. Phrase under the strain of arithmetic no bravery can cancel. When the dust finally settles over the railway once fought for meter by meter, the strategic lesson is legible even to those who do not wish to read it. In modern war, initiative dies when fuel does. The desert, impartial as ever, keeps the wreckage and says nothing. In 1943, victory posters still carry Rommel's profile, but the frame around him tightens. Transfers move him from North Africa's open geometry to France's coastline, where concrete, angles, and timetables define the task now named by propaganda Fortress Europe. Under Oberbefehlshaber West, he surveys beaches from the Low Countries to Normandy, concludes that the Atlantic Wall is a phrase, not a fact, and orders defenses that match physics rather than slogans. Anti-landing obstacles, teller mines, floodable fields, and the sharpened stakes later nicknamed Rommel's asparagus. He argues in memoranda that only a decisive counterattack at the waterline can succeed because Allied air power will shred reserves moving by day. The case is practical and supported by numbers, airframe counts, sortie rates, bridge capacities, and therefore controversial in a structure where deference outranks data. Parallel to the engineering work, a quieter architecture rises around him. Staff reshuffles replace independent minds with political loyalists. The SS, answerable to Heinrich Himmler, compiles assessments heavy with adjectives like unreliable and insufficiently National Socialist. Joseph Goebbels appreciates Rommel's reach to the public yet fears the gravitational pull of a soldier admired beyond the party. Surveillance extends into domestic spaces. Letters opened, visitors logged, careless remarks reported up the chain. None of this halts the daily program. Inspections in rain and blown sand, briefings that end only when details are correct, long drives in an Opel staff car along hedgerow lanes that will soon have names on maps from Ottawa to Auckland. Operationally, the arithmetic grows bleaker. Allied air superiority becomes a fact measured in the number of craters on French rail yards. Ammunition deliveries are late or they are rumors. Meanwhile, intelligence summaries warn of massing shipping in British ports, of rehearsals that look less like deception and more like inevitability. In conferences with superiors, Rommel's tone is not despair but probability. He frames outcomes as branches and assigns them likelihoods. If the invasion lands with weight and weather, he notes, the war will move beyond the boundary of negotiable outcomes. In systems where optimism is mandatory, probability becomes a provocative act. Every piece of history we uncover brings the past a little closer. If you'd like to keep exploring these hidden moments with us, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Your support keeps these stories alive. Cloud decks over the Channel in early June 1944 look kindly to some and treacherous to others. For planners in England, weather officers search for a window. For defenders in France, the same fronts feel like a curtain that might delay the inevitable. Rommel uses the interlude to seek leverage where concrete and mines cannot provide it, at the source of decision. He travels to confer, taking with him assessments that merge field observation with statistics. The coastline cannot be everywhere strong. Allied air interdiction will isolate the battlefield. Mobile reserves will be immobilized by day and hunted at night. He recommends concentrating anti-tank weapons forward, preparing for immediate counterblows, and, most controversially, recognizing that a negotiated end becomes harder with every ship that sails. While discussions orbit the same phrases, fortress, will destiny, the operational clock runs out. In the gray hours of 6th of June 1944, airborne formations descend inland to seize causeways and high ground. Off the beaches, naval gunfire begins a lesson in mass. German radar plots too many echoes to prioritize. Telephone exchanges jam with overlapping reports. At strong points like Pointe du Hoc and the sectors later known by code names, defenders fight with skill and courage, yet the method of attack is industrial, redundant, layered, and supplied across a sea the attacker's own. Rommel's written insistence on daylight movement restrictions for reserves proves prescient as columns halted by destroyed bridges and strafing runs accumulate behind bottlenecks. The mapmakers could have predicted. By nightfall, the lodgment is imperfect but real. Local counterattacks bite into its edges. None cut it free. Reports from Corps and Army headquarters share a theme. Material preponderance supported by air control changes the character of battle from maneuver to containment. In subsequent days, hedgerows become fortresses, and artillery, now attached to an alliance that can feed it forever, speaks more often than maneuver does. Memoranda leaving the field continue to tally specifics. A destroyed rail span here, a fuel deficit there. But beneath the numbers stands a conclusion enforced by experience rather than rhetoric. The battlefield now belongs to those who chose it. The weather, the tide tables, the moonlight calculations, every variable has been bent toward a single outcome, and it is unfolding. After the landings, a mood hardens across sections of the Army leadership. The problem set presented by material disparity appears unsolvable within the existing political frame, and so a separate calculus emerges. remove the frame. Generals, staff colonels, and reservists with deep networks, Ludwig Beck, Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, and the officer who will carry the explosive device, Klaus von Stauffenberg, construct a plan that blends legality with force. The reserve army will seize key nodes under the pretense of Operation Valkyrie. Communications will be cut. A public statement will present continuity of government without the architect of the disaster. Rommel, injured on 17 July 1944, when his staff car is strafed by Allied aircraft near Livarot, lies recovering with head trauma and fractured bones as the conspiracy accelerates. Intermediaries probe his position. His recorded stance in memoranda and post-war testimonies sketches a line between refusal and revolt. He favors arrest and trial, not assassination, and urges negotiations with the Western Allies before the Eastern Front consumes Germany entirely. In the moral physics of a collapsing regime, nuance provides no armor. On 20 July, the suitcase bomb detonates at the Wolfschanze. The blast kills and maims but does not remove the target. The plot collapses in hours, its architecture exposed by contingency and the speed of repression. What follows is mechanical. The Gestapo compiles lists and arrests. Interrogations extract names that multiply like branching trees. Some are core conspirators. Others are spoken to deflect pain. Still others are reputations fed into the machine out of envy or fear. Rommel's name surfaces enough times to become an inevitability in files that will not be reviewed by a neutral court. The political logic that had long viewed celebrity as risk and independence as disloyalty now acquires a pretext with stamped signatures. In that junction between security bureaucracy and personal resentment, a conclusion is drafted before evidence is weighed. The most famous general has become the most dangerous symbol. On 14 October 1944, the garden at Herrlingen is still with autumn. Leaves skip along a stone path. A uniform cap rests on a table beside a walking stick. Visitors arrive, General Wilhelm Burgdorf and General Ernst Mazel, emissaries whose presence denotes not honor but finality. The conditions are stated with bureaucratic neatness learned in personnel offices and reinforced by a regime that conflates loyalty with fear. Accept poison and a funeral with military trappings, or refuse and trigger a public trial before the People's Court, where outcomes are sentences and consequences will extend to family. There are precedents. None end well. The scene that follows is short, structured by duty rather than spectacle. Farewells are private, the timing precise. A cyanide capsule, efficient, silent, and common in an era of security services, completes the transaction. The official communique will cite cerebral hemorrhage after car injuries. The funeral will feature wreaths, music, and orations that erase the agency behind the end. Attendees will salute sincerely, or because sincerity is indistinguishable from prudence in a state that audits facial expressions. Institutionally, the act removes a problem and broadcasts a warning. To the Wehrmacht's remaining senior leaders, it clarifies that battlefield merit does not purchase exception. To the officer corps' middle strata, it confirms that calculations of honor and survival have parted ways. Propaganda organs exploit the moment with paradoxical skill. They extol the man while burying the manner of his death, converting a silenced critic into a sanitized emblem. Clerks log medals and benefits for the widow. Security offices close files with notes that imply resolution rather than fear. The ledger balances in the way bureaucratic ledgers do, neatly and at great human cost. In the months after the funeral, newsreels loop a curated life. Rommel in goggles over a map table. Rommel smiling beside mechanics. Rommel pinning awards on dusty tunics. The narrative is deliberate. A faithful soldier taken by wounds, emblem of endurance absent of controversy. Posters fix his image above words about duty. School assemblies recite lines that require no imagination. Within barracks, the reception is more complicated. Officers who have seen the garden path in Herrlingen with their mind's eye understand what cannot be said. They pass lessons obliquely to junior leaders. Trust the men beside you. Trust the map. Trust the arithmetic of ammunition and fuel. Trust none of the abstractions that ignore those measures. By early 1945, with the Vistula-Oder offensive driving from the east and Allied armies crossing the Rhine from the west, command conferences become shorter and less certain. Personnel charts show promotions that would have taken years now occurring in weeks. Experience is replaced by availability. The culture of the high command, once confident enough to debate, narrows to clicks that echo the last directives issued from a bunker, increasingly separated from terrain. In that airless corridor, memory becomes a form of dissent. The knowledge that a celebrated general could be eliminated by paperwork and euphemism erodes the last residues of strategic candor. The effects are measurable, if indirect. Reports avoid framing options that contradict predetermined outcomes. Unit diaries record withdrawals as elastic defense, encirclements as mobile operations, words that protect careers more than they describe ground. Meanwhile, civilians watch trains go east and not return. Towns learn the shape of aerial maps by counting the gaps where rail yards used to be. Inside that shrinking world, the curated legend of a dead field marshal does two incompatible jobs. It comforts a public that wants to believe in clean heroism, and it reminds soldiers that reality has been edited. The dissonance hums like a transformer about to fail. Spring 1945 lowers like cloud over a city of cellars. In Berlin, artillery pulses through stone as the Red Army closes the last arcs. Dust hangs in stairwells. Candles gutter in rooms that once held receptions. The institutions that organized a continent's violence now manage only fragments. Roadblocks, couriers, last-minute promotions that change signatures, not fate. Many of the figures central to the story are already absent. Some executed after show trials, some self-removed, some standing at maps that no longer represent what is outside the door. The senior leadership's language contracts to accusations and promises no longer convertible into outcomes. Guns deliver the only decisions anyone can trust. Elsewhere, armies that once fought Rommel acknowledge a different reckoning. British commanders send private condolences. American leaders who studied his tempo in North Africa file assessments that mark him as a professional adversary who forced adaptation, longer supply tails, improved armored doctrine, better combined arms choreography. In staff colleges that will teach the next generation, case studies of mobile warfare place his campaigns alongside those of his opponents, rewarding methods without endorsing causes. Meanwhile, the civilians who survived measure their losses in ways that do not fit cleanly into tables. Names, addresses, habits of a city that no longer exists. Post-war decades assemble an afterlife out of archives, memoirs, and arguments. Historiography revises and revises again. The man's tactical brilliance and operational nerve are weighed against the regime he served. His skepticism toward certain policies is noted beside his participation in earlier triumphs that made later tragedies possible. The record resists simplification. What remains clear sits not in grand statements but in a chain of practical truths. Logistics sets the horizon of operations. Institutions punish dissent even when dissent is accurate. Celebrity protects no one when systems demand obedience. The film ends not with a verdict but with an image. Wind moving over a quiet garden path, leaves ticking against stone, an ordinary place where power, fear and choice crossed and history chose its line through a single afternoon. If you've made it this far, you're one of us, searching for the truth behind the headlines and the courage behind the silence. Subscribe to the channel, and let's keep exploring the hidden wars, secret operations, and untold fates that shape the world we live in.